Okay, this lecture is on the Ukraine versus Russia, old grudges and new weapons. Okay, so right off the bat, there is also a preliminary discussion of Russia under the Tsars and with the system of Cossacks. That's you're going to get on starting Monday. And this will be appended to it at the end of that. So it will become a larger lecture with 30 slides rather than the 15. Okay, everybody got that? All right, moving right along here. How do I move the slides? There should be a little button. Wait a minute, there's a little arrow here. Okay, for the centuries, the Ukraine was ruled by Vikings. The Vikings came from Sweden. We think of the Vikings that they went west and they discovered Iceland and Greenland and they caused trouble in England and they eventually discovered America. But that's not all the Vikings. The Vikings in Sweden went east. They went down the rivers between the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. There's a whole system of riparian waterways. The Volga, the Don, a lot of those rivers. Anyhow, Viking princes ruled from Kiev. Kiev was a city long time ago. The rule of the Vikings ended when the Mongols came around. The Mongols came around and around 1270, Anno Domini, the Mongols conquered Russia, they conquered the Ukraine, they conquered all of Eastern Europe. And that included Moscow and Kiev. They conquered those places. And when they would conquer those places, they go in there, burn down the town, kill the men, rape the women, enslave the children. It's not a simple, you're out of power and we're in power. So when the Mongol Empire finally dissipated, this was a couple of hundred years later, the Ukraine was taken over by the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It was a bit like the Wild West in America. Much of the land was practically independent. It was the home of Cossacks. The word Cossack means adventurer or free person. They didn't want to be slaves or serfs to anybody. So they went to this long strip of land that goes from Europe all the way across to the Pacific. And that land was called the steppes. It's just prairie, open land. And these horsemen were fairly warlike. They didn't take guff from anybody, and they were independent. Now, one of those Cossack leaders declared war on the Polish Commonwealth. He said, I'm not going to abide by you. This leader then signed a treaty with Russia that giving the Tsar overlordship over the Ukraine. Since then, Russia has always used that as a pretext that Ukraine belongs to Russia. Even though times change, we've got a newspaper in our archives from 1990 in which the front page it gives Ukraine independence from Russia. But that's only when Russia wants to abide by that. When Russia's on the move, they say, well, that's nothing. Okay, in the era of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the Ukraine was one of those republics. Whether the Ukrainians liked it or not was immaterial. What was important is that they were ostensibly part of Russia. So were Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. All of those places are now independent. So let's talk about a little bit about, can I move around here? Does it matter? No, I better stay in place. Okay, it's the Kremlin. Okay, the Kremlin is the Red Castle. It's the Red Keep. Uh, the Red Keep was first captured by the Mongols. The Mongols captured it and destroyed it. That's what Mongols would do. Genghis Khan was fairly conservative about that. Uh, the Turks, the Turks captured Moscow. Okay, a few hundred years later, the Polish captured Moscow. A few hundred years later, the French captured Moscow. Remember the War of 1812 and the Marseillaise? Napoleon Bonaparte went into Moscow and burned it. The Germans under Hitler came within sight of the Kremlin. They could see it through their binoculars. They were dropping leaflets saying surrender, surrender now, on the landing in the Kremlin. They came extremely close to capturing Moscow. And millions of Russians were killed in World War II. So paranoia is ingrained into the Russian psyche. This is not to say that you have to like the Russians, but you should understand your enemy. And the Russians, why would they be paranoid? Well, the Mongols captured Moscow and destroyed it. The Turks captured Moscow and destroyed it. The Polish captured Moscow. The French captured Moscow and burned it. And the Nazis almost captured it. So it's part of Russia's headset, this paranoia. And you can be paranoid, but that doesn't mean nobody's out to get you. They are very suspicious of NATO. They have been suspicious of NATO ever since it was organized. And these people of the Warsaw Pact, these were all Russian colonies. They were Russian subjects. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Bulgaria, sir.
Should I hold my questions to the end?
Yes, please. Okay, all of those places were under Russian control after World War II. And now none of them are under Russian control. So they have been worried about the West. And why not? The French burned Moscow. Okay, there's another aspect about Russia that needs to be understood also. And that is that for centuries, Russia fought the rest of the world for the Crimea. They fought for hundreds of years. They fought the Turks and the Muslims. And they even fought the British and the French. Little dust-up called the Crimean War. So they fought for the Crimea many, many times. Often they lost, but still, they consider the Crimea to be part of Russia. And systematically, they've filled it with ethnic Russians. And so when Russia invaded in 2014, we call it an invasion. Any idea how many people were killed? Nobody. Nobody got killed. That's because they had a referendum, and 9 out of 10 of the humans living in the Crimea voted to rejoin Russia. The 1/10 who didn't vote to rejoin Russia, they were Tartars. Tartars were Islamic people originally from Turkey and from that area. And they did not vote to rejoin Russia, but you couldn't expect them to. 90% voted in favor of it. Now, Russia has always wanted a warm port. They have ports in Archangel, Murmansk, St. Petersburg, Vladivostok. Something happens to those ports in wintertime. Water freezes. You can't sail your ships in or out. So they have wanted a port for centuries, a warm water port. And they have one in Sevastopol. After the Russians annexed Crimea, they built a bridge. Let me back up here a moment so that you see the Kerch Peninsula here? They built a bridge connecting it with Russia. It's the longest bridge in the world. This bridge took 3 years to build. This is a Russian commemorative stamp. Yeah, we built the bridge. And Vladimir Putin, the Russian dictator, was there. He was operating forklifts, and they had him, leaning on a shovel and with a construction hat on, doing all that stuff. They put a lot of effort into it. Okay, let's look at these borders. The steppes goes all the way across to the Pacific. The Cossacks, which you will learn in the earlier iteration, the Cossacks have been what the Russians used as their military, their private army. The Cossacks were divided into groups all across the steppes from Europe to the Pacific Ocean. And one of the miscalculations that was made by Mr. Putin was he thought that the Zaporozh Cossacks, because of their heritage, were going to overwhelmingly go in favor of Russia, like the Don Cossacks. That has not happened. And so you've got a war that has some aspects of being a civil war. And a civil war is such that if you were to ask a Russian commander, hey, if we shoot this missile, it's going to blow up that condominium. And then somebody says, yeah, but it's full of civilians. The commander would go, even better. That's what happens in civil war when people just get their backs up against each other. Now, this war started with a special operation. This special operation is what they're still calling it, although it's a special operation that did not succeed. The war started February 24th, just over a year ago. That's why we didn't get a chance in Washington, but the Ukraine is the 800-pound gorilla in the room that nobody wanted to talk about. The war started just over a year ago. The Russians sent 30 helicopters to land at Hostomel Airport. Hostomel Airport is as far away from downtown Kiev as Miami International is from FIU. It's a short drive, okay? While they were in the air, a friendly power sent Mr. Zelensky, President Zelensky, a message saying the Russians are in the air, they're coming, you better leave. Pack up and we'll take you, and so come on, leave. Okay. There were a Russian spy who worked for the Ukrainian airport, had vans already gassed up, keys in the ignition, ready to go. When these commandos landed their helicopters, they were going to get in the vans, go to Zelensky's house, and have a talk with him, if he was still there. Now, behind those helicopters were two Antonov cargo planes full of Russian commandos, 700 troops. Behind them, in Belarus, a convoy of motor vehicles, tanks, trucks, jeeps, Humvees, all of that got on the road and it's only 40 miles. We'll talk about that convoy in a little bit. But something happened. One is the Ukrainians knew that the Russians were coming. They had proof. Somebody, a friendly power, told the Ukrainians, hey, they're en route. Okay, so the Ukrainians parked cars and buses and trucks across the runway to disrupt the landings of the helicopters. And they slit the tires so that you couldn't just push them out of the way easily. Okay? The Ukrainian soldiers fought bravely and intelligently. Now, the plan was that these commandos were going to drive up to Zelensky's house and they were going to talk to him. They were going to talk turkey with Mr. Zelensky. I mean, come on, he's a Jewish comic. What business has he got being in politics? This is how politics can end. So either get in your car, take your family, and leave, and that's the end of this, or you go down in the basement with your family, and the same thing happens as what happened to the Romanovs. You go down in the basement, you never come back up. But Zelensky had those helicopters stopped at the airport. And the two Antonov aircraft full of commandos that were coming in behind them, they shot them down right over the airport. A cargo plane coming in for a landing, if you're standing on the flight line, you know, it's big as a house. You can't miss it. And they shot them down. And both of those aircraft were shot down by shoulder-held missiles supplied by a friendly power. Okay, so that pretty much stopped the special operation. Now, the trucks and the convoy that had left Belarus finally got to the airport, but by then, Zelensky had sent a message saying, I'm not leaving, I don't need a ride out. I need bullets. And the Ukrainians had found their got their backup, and the airport changed hands 2 or 3 times, but then the Russians were defeated, and that's that convoy. Remember, you saw pictures of hundreds of Russian vehicles. So anyhow, that's what happened to the special operation. It was supposed to be a one-hit fight. Russia would hit the Ukraine would hit the floor. But for us, the reasons we've gone into, that did not happen. Since then, full-blown war has broken out in this place. Now, the United States, in 20 years in Afghanistan, lost 2,500 soldiers. In 20 years. The Russians and the Ukrainians, their armies have lost 100,000 in 1 year. What you've got is a much more serious situation than there have been crimes against humanity. These are not garbage bags going to the dump. Those are humans. There again, you've got whole apartment houses being blown up. And you've got bread being used as a weapon. The Ukraine has been a very fertile region of the planet. They've grown a lot of wheat, and that wheat has been intercepted by the Russian Navy. So it has not been able to leave Odessa and the ports. I mean, there's battles going on. And wherever they can, they've seized not just the land, but the tractors and the equipment to farm the wheat. So bread is become a weapon. Another weapon is sunflowers. Okay, sunflower seeds. Nobody's going to get, chubby over sunflower seeds. However, animals use it, like sheep, like cattle, like hogs. So if you're interested in bacon or steak or lamb chops, yeah. So moving right along, the Ukrainians sank the Moscow. That's a real important event. The Moscow, that's the flagship of the Russian fleet, and they sank it. Okay. The Ukrainians got back at them by attacking the bridge. Remember the bridge? They blew up photographs of that commemorative stamp showing it being blown up. So the cost of war, you've got 12,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed, 8,000 civilians killed, including children, hundreds of children. You've got 14,000 civilians wounded. These are rough numbers that are gotten from crunching. Both sides lie like, well, you killed this many and that many. But you can synthesize it down till you've got about 25,000 Russian soldiers killed and 50,000 soldiers wounded. And there is no end in sight to this. And that's the major problem. What comes next is anybody's bet. But if Putin stays in power, he has said often enough that he will release tactical nuclear weapons. He said that we could do this. And if he's pushed into a corner, you got to listen to what people say, because if he says something often enough, he just might do it. And then again, there's been talk about if he's if they have an election in Russia and they get somebody else, which could happen. We don't know what's going on there, but the person who replaces him might be more of a loose cannon. So these are issues that are very serious to all of us and could affect, just for example, if Russia were to say, okay, the Ukraine's winning, they're going to try and retake the Crimea, which is ours. Let's just send a tactical nuke by a cruise missile or a helicopter or an airplane or just an artillery shell. You get a 500 kiloton, uh, small, not even a megaton. You wipe out downtown Kiev. You get rid of Zelensky and all of that whole group. His chiefs of staff, his intel, his ministers of defense, all of those people. Plus, you get about 15,000 civilians. What would happen if that were to happen is the first thing would be that every single truck driver on the road from the west to the Ukraine with bullets would pull off to the side of the road and turn up the radio. And as soon as they say, hey, Kiev is glowing, they're going to turn around and head back west because they know there's not going to be anybody waiting for them. There's another group that, should such a dire thing occur in China, if such a thing were to happen, there's 100 million Chinese. There's a billion Chinese. They've got a leadership of 100 million. And that's everything from the NCOs to the chiefs of staff to the head Politburo. They're all going to have one thought as soon as the news were to get out. They're going to go, now's our chance. And where one goes off, you get perhaps a second, and then you don't know. So there's a lot of these issues are, I hope, to be ironed out by the political process and by diplomacy. So we'll see what happens. Keep your seatbelts fastened, keep reading, and keep writing. That is all.